Hey everyone, Jeff here from Films at Home. Thanks for coming back to the channel. Now, if you're anything like me, you have been enjoying the hell out of Stranger Things, especially the latest release of Stranger Things Season 4, Part 1. And I love the show Stranger Things. It is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Now, watching the show really had me thinking. It's inspired by so many different pieces of pop culture and movies, primarily from the 80s. And so what I want to do here is bring you a list of 10 movies that you really need to watch if you've been enjoying Stranger Things. Because honestly, you'll enjoy Stranger Things even more after you've watched these 10 movies. Now, before we get started, make sure you subscribe for more content like this. I really appreciate it. And now, let's start with number 1 on my list of the top 10 movies you need to watch if you like Stranger Things. So number 1 on the list, this may be obvious, but it's going to be Stand By Me, which is an excellent movie adapted from a Stephen King novella called The Body. This is one of the quintessential 80s movies and one of the best coming-of-age stories of all time. Now, specifically, if you enjoyed Season 1 and Season 2 of Stranger Things more, when they're sort of on the younger side, more like late elementary, middle school age, you'll really enjoy Stand By Me. It's a great coming-of-age story, and really Vern, Chris, Teddy, and Gordy, that's sort of the original like Lucas, Mike, Will, and Dustin. That was definitely heavily inspired by Stand By Me, right down to the ages of the characters and sort of their personality traits as well. You can see a lot of similarities between the two. Stand By Me is often regarded as one of the best movies of all time. It makes a lot of top 100 or movie bucket lists, and it's just one you really need to watch. Directed by Rob Reiner from a Stephen King novella, it's a great movie, and it'll really show off where the Duffer Brothers got some of their ideas from Stranger Things and how they sort of formulated that cast and the dynamic between the main 4 characters specifically. Now, number 2 on this list is going to be E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Now, a lot of Stranger Things was inspired by the Steven Spielberg Amblin Entertainment movies of the 1980s. And Stranger Things has a lot of references to E.T. I mean, there's just the bike riding right off the beginning of the season, but even later in Season 4, there's a ton of just like kids riding their bikes down a street in the 80s in 80s clothing. And anytime I think of that, I go, okay, that's a callback to E.T. It's not that kids didn't ride their bikes anywhere in any other movie, but I immediately think the iconic scene in E.T., and they definitely set it up that way at times. If you haven't seen E.T., I don't know what you're waiting for, but it's an excellent movie, really well done, a Spielberg classic. It's a story of an alien who kind of gets stranded here on Earth, and there's, government groups involved and secret government groups, and they're quarantining the family because he's an alien, and, there's all the sort of themes you get from Stranger Things. It feels very much like a Stranger Things episode. If an alien landed in Hawkins, I imagine that this is what that episode would be like, is an E.T., essentially the movie. So highly, highly recommend E.T. One everyone should watch. And if you like Stranger Things and you haven't seen E.T., you'll really start to see some of the similarities there. Now, number 3, I'm going to go with a horror movie called The Void. This is sort of underappreciated. I know in the horror community it's gotten a lot of love, but I don't know that it's gotten a lot of love mainstream. It's a more recent release, but it definitely plays heavily on 80s horror themes, body horror, great practical effects, very much like a John Carpenter type horror movie. The Void deals with these really cool monster designs, very much, think Demogorgon, think Mind Flayer, that sort of thing in The Void. It's pretty gory. It has some crazy body horror, which we're starting to see more of in Stranger Things Season 3, Season 4, as they get a little bit darker in their themes. So if you've liked the later seasons more, as those have gotten a little bit scarier and more terrifying, you're going to like The Void. So The Void is well worth watching. If you have a chance to watch it, definitely calls back to those 80s horror movies. So if you like things like Stranger Things, but you also like The Thing, if you like The Blob, if you like, stuff like that sort of body horror, John Carpenter-ish genre from the 80s, you'll love The Void. Now, number 4, I've got a recent release, and it's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Now, I grew up on these books. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was like my first introduction to horror. Absolutely loved those books. I read every single one of the stories, and I distinctly remember the original artwork, which was incredible. Now, the movie came out just a couple of years ago, and it does touch on some of the more popular stories from the books, but the movie takes a little bit of a different turn, where there's a group of kids in the town who sort of discover that this book is like opening a portal to the stories and the monsters and creatures within those stories. stories, and they need to sort of figure out how to close that down and save their town. Now, if that sounds like Stranger Things, you're pretty much right on here. It was definitely inspired by the Stranger Things vibe, and then they took these classic stories from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books and made that sort of the plot of the movie. So it's a little bit, this one's like the only one that's sort of derivative of Stranger Things, where it came after Stranger Things had already been released, but it's a great movie. I actually really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people kind of give it hate, but it has some really cool creature effects, really great practical effects. It's a decent story, and if you like that Stranger Things sort of vibe, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I think, is the closest thing we've had in the last few years to a movie that really matches that same sort of aura that Stranger Things gives off. Now, at number 5, we've got to go back to Spielberg, and I've got to go with the Goonies. Of course, anytime you get a group of kids coming together, going on an adventure, I immediately think the Goonies. And Stranger Things was definitely inspired by the Goonies. Again, those Spielberg, Amblin movies of the 80s heavily influenced the Duffer Brothers where they were growing up, and then they created this show, Stranger Things. The Goonies is a ton of fun. It's one of my favorite 80s movies. It has an excellent cast full of actors and actresses who you no doubt will recognize even as they've grown up. It's a little bit less supernatural and more contained than Stranger Things. It's sort of contained in its own nice little bubble. You know, they're searching for treasure within this sort of cave system and underground system. It's not as supernatural as some of the other ones on this list, but if you're looking for just pure adventure fun with a great group of kids and an awesome cast, Goonies is one you have to watch. It just has iconic scenes throughout, and you'll definitely see the similarities between some of the Stranger Things moments and what's going on within the Goonies. Now, number 6 on the list, I went with Carrie, specifically because of its similarities to the character 11 in Stranger Things. Now, if you haven't watched Stranger Things Season 4 yet, spoilers here, but there is definitely a big Carrie-esque moment within Stranger Things, and then sort of a Carrie-esque retaliation to that moment, but also a really scary opening scene to Season 4, which definitely harkens back to Carrie. Carrie is essentially about this girl whose mother is like uber religious, but she has these telekinetic powers that have been, locked inside of her. And I'm oversimplifying this because, it's a short video. But essentially, she goes to the prom, pig's blood dumped on her, she freaks out, she burns down the whole building, right? These telekinetic powers come out, and she's trying to harness them and trying to control them, and they get out of control at times. Season 4 of Stranger Things specifically brought me back into that world of Carrie with how they were treating 11 and her dealing with the loss of powers and trying to get them back, and possibly the consequences of her powers and what they've done to hurt people in the past. It was a really cool callback to Carrie, and you could definitely tell that they were setting 11 up to be that sort of anti-hero in some ways. So I'm curious where they take her moving forward, but if you watch Carrie, it's one of the best horror movies ever made. Another Stephen King book and novel that was adapted into a movie, and I think you guys will just really love the movie itself regardless of the Stranger Things connection. But if 11 is one of your favorite characters, then you should totally watch Carrie. Now, number 7 on the list, I'm going with another more recent release, which is The Summer of '84. This is one of my favorite horror movies that's come out in the last decade. It follows a group of kids around who are basically sort of convinced that their neighbor is a serial killer and is killing off kids. And there's sort of all these twists and turns, and the kids, take matters into their own hands, and they're going on their adventures, and it's, very Stranger Things, where you're sort of asking, like, where are the adults in this town, and why is nobody paying attention to the kids? But that sort of was the 80s. Kids were free. Kids were running around the streets, riding their bikes. You'd leave at sunrise and be back by sunset, and parents wouldn't really pay attention to their kids. So, the idea that these kids should kind of get into this trouble and dive down this sort of mystery of who's killing these kids, is my neighbor a serial killer? Very cool vibe to the whole thing. Great synth music throughout. Like, it is super cool in the same way that Stranger Things has that great score. Summer of '84 has some of the best 80s wave music that I've heard on any movie soundtrack. Like, it's a ton of fun to watch. So if that's your sort of vibe, if you want to get a little bit darker, this is definitely more serial killer. This is definitely more horror than maybe some of the others on the list, which are more adventure. But I think you guys will like it, and I do still think it's a movie that deserves more attention. Now, at number 8, fittingly, I'm going to talk about Super 8. Now, Super 8's a J.J. Abrams directed movie, and it is a sort of supernatural, alien type of vibe to the whole film. Again, following a group of kids who are trying to figure out a mystery. I'm not trying to spoil any of these movies in case you haven't seen them, trying to talk pretty broad about them. But Super 8 is definitely the type of movie that inspired this wave of 80s nostalgia. And it clearly is sort of like the template for Stranger Things, at least in modern media. There hadn't been a movie like Super 8 in a fairly long time. It very much harkens back to the days of E.T. and the Goonies and was clearly inspired by those movies. And so it's sort of in the middle ground between when Stranger Things was released and all those 80s movies, and it sort of kicked off, I think, even before it was ready, this wave of 80s nostalgia which has driven Stranger Things to such popularity. So Super 8, it's an excellent movie. It's a ton of fun to watch. It has a great cast. Elle Fanning is in it. She's awesome. I mean, it's really well done and well put together. If you can get over some of the solar flares that J.J. Abrams puts in like every shot, it's well worth a watch, and you'll definitely see some of the similarities in where I'm sure the Duffer Brothers took some stuff and inspiration from Super 8. Now for number 9, we've got to talk about It. It is another movie developed from a Stephen King novel, so you can clearly see the Duffer Brothers were Stephen King fans, and there were a ton of great 80s horror adventure movies based on Stephen King books, so it goes hand in hand. But whether we're talking Tim Curry in the original TV movie, or we're talking Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise in the It and It Chapter 2 releases more recently, they are both very much firmly within what I would call the Stranger Things genre. Again, you're dealing with supernatural horror, supernatural elements, terrorizing kids in a small town, only happening in this town. Think Derry is very much like Hawkins. And in the newer movies, even Finn Wolfhard, who plays Mike in Stranger Things, is in those movies. In that sort of gang that is in especially It Chapter 1, very similar to the gang from Stranger Things. And of course, the book and the TV movie came long before Stranger Things, so the kind of re-release of It was definitely inspired by this new wave of excitement around 80s and 80s nostalgia and that vibe. But any of those three movies, whichever one you watch, is definitely going to give you a pretty similar experience. And if you like the Stranger Things vibe, It is really going to get you pretty close to that. You can imagine, Pennywise sort of being the Mind Flayer, sort of being Vecna, sort of being a combination of all these things. It's able to transform. It can, take kids and like literally eat kids and kill kids. I mean, they don't hold back in these movies, very much like Stranger Things doesn't. I mean, kids are getting killed in Stranger Things. This is not, a strange occurrence, and it's what's happening in It as well, and it's up to this sort of group of friends to solve this mystery and try to shut down this horrible thing that's happening to their town, this curse that's been placed on their town. So tons of elements from It are present all throughout Stranger Things. And then finally at number 10, I'm going to round this out with Nightmare on Elm Street series. Now before season 4, I probably wouldn't have recommended Nightmare on Elm Street specifically for fans of Stranger Things, but season 4 of Stranger Things almost plays out like a Nightmare on Elm Street miniseries. The character of Vecna is very similar to the character of Freddy, where he's almost infiltrating your thoughts, not necessarily your dreams, but definitely playing on past trauma and messing with your head, and then eventually taking you into either this dream space or the upside down and taunting you and then killing you. So I can clearly see where Vecna was inspired by Freddy Krueger, and the Nightmare on Elm Street series is extremely 80s and very much within the same fashion sense that the kids from Stranger Things have. But the themes that are in Nightmare on Elm Street tie very closely to season 4. So I can definitely see where the Duffer Brothers pulled from Nightmare on Elm Street. In fact, they even had Robert Englund to come in and play the character of Victor Creel, which Nancy and Robin interview in the insane asylum down in the basement. That was actually the actor who plays Freddy. So clearly there was an homage here to Nightmare on Elm Street and a little throwback there using the original actor of Freddy Krueger in their show. Nightmare on Elm Street is very much more in the horror slasher genre, but Freddy is one of the best characters of all time in horror. Some of the best one-liners, even as the movies get, to Nightmare on Elm Street 3, 4, 5, and they get kind of cheesy, they're still a ton of fun to watch. And you can clearly see where, especially as the kids are getting older, in that group of Nancy, Jonathan, Steve, Robin, like that kind of older group, and now Eddie, that's more of a Nightmare on Elm Street vibe that they're kind of working through. That's more of the dynamic between the cast that you can expect in Nightmare on Elm Street. Not so much the younger kids with Lucas, Mike, Will, and Dustin, but more so that older group. If you enjoy their time and their scenes better, you'll really like Nightmare on Elm Street. So that's my list. There's 10 movies for you guys to enjoy if you've been enjoying Stranger Things. These will call back to Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, Season 4. This covers the entire span of Stranger Things so far, but I was inspired to make this list because I made a little TikTok video about it, and it blew up. It got a ton of views. So obviously people are interested in looking for more recommendations within this sort of niche genre of Stranger Things, 80s nostalgia, supernatural horror, adventure. All this stuff that goes into Stranger Things, people are clamoring for. So I wanted to give you 10 recommendations, and hopefully, I'm sure some of you have seen a lot of these, but hopefully you get some new recommendations, whether it's just 1 or 2 movies. That makes me happy if I can find something new for you. So hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it's a little bit of a different video for my channel, but I am experimenting with some different types of content, all going to be movie related. I love talking movies, and some of you had asked me to just talk more movies and less physical media. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure you subscribed. Following along here on YouTube, follow all my links to social media down in the description, as well as all the other links to partners that support my channel down there as well. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll talk to you all soon.